night has a way of softening the world, wrapping everything in a quiet stillness that feels safe at first glance. Doors stay closed, houses settle into their foundations, and the familiar outlines of neighborhoods fade into gentle pockets of shadow. But sometimes, when the noise of the day finally drains away, that silence becomes heavier, almost expectant, as if the night is waiting for someone to make the smallest mistake. And it's in those moments, when a hallway feels too long or a light flickers in the wrong room, that we become aware of how thin the boundaries around us truly are. These stories come from people who thought they were simply opening a door they'd seen 100 times before: closets, basements, apartments, familiar spaces that should have offered comfort. Instead, they found rooms that didn't belong, hallways that weren't on any map, or reflections that stopped matching their movements. None of them were searching for anything strange. They weren't ghost hunters or thrill seekers. They were ordinary people who stumbled into moments the night kept hidden from everyone else, until the moment they reached for a knob they shouldn't have touched. As you listen, you may notice a quiet thread running through each tale: how easy it is for the world to shift by just an inch, how a familiar door can open into something older than the walls surrounding it. These aren't loud, violent encounters. They're small slips, quiet steps into spaces that feel almost right, almost familiar, until the details shift and the air changes temperature and you realize you've stepped someplace you were never meant to see. And once you see something like that, closing the door doesn't always make it go away. So settle in and let the darkness press a little closer, the way it always does when the night grows long and the house grows still. These are 7 real accounts of people who opened the wrong door, softly told, slowly unfolding, and lingering long after you turn off the lights. And tonight we begin with the first one. I went back to my parents' house for a weekend in early autumn, mostly because I needed a break from the noise of the city. I hadn't stayed overnight in my old bedroom for years, but walking inside felt strangely comforting. The faint smell of laundry detergent, the familiar creak in the floorboards, even the way the window let in a soft, cool breeze when the curtains moved. I unpacked slowly, placing a few folded clothes on the bed and letting myself sink into the stillness of a house that sleeps early. My parents had turned in already, and the whole place was quiet in that particular way only childhood homes can be, where every sound feels both nostalgic and slightly too loud. It was late, maybe a little past midnight, and I remember thinking how peaceful the night felt before anything happened. I was folding a sweater when I noticed the closet door was slightly open. Just an inch or two, not enough to be alarming, but enough to catch my eye. I was sure I'd closed it earlier while airing out the room, and the latch was one of those old ones that sticks unless you push firmly. I walked over, pushed it shut, and heard the soft click of the latch catching. It didn't seem important at the time, just one of those small things old houses do. But when I turned around a few minutes later, the door was open again by the exact same amount. Just a sliver, just enough to show darkness behind it. I felt a faint prickle across my shoulders, more from surprise than fear, and told myself the latch was probably just worn out after all these years. I kept folding clothes, trying to ignore the door, but I couldn't shake the sense that the air around it felt slightly cooler than the rest of the room. My childhood bedroom always ran warm, especially at night, but a thin draft brushed lightly against my arm every time I walked past. I paused once, holding my breath to listen for anything inside: shifting boxes, loose hangers, something that could explain a draft, but the closet was silent. Even the house itself felt like it was holding still, almost waiting. I pushed the door closed again, pressing harder this time. The latch clicked loudly, reassuringly, but the silence afterward felt heavier. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the same sense of unease kept drifting back, slow and persistent. Eventually, I sighed, stood up, and decided to unpack the rest of my bag before bed. When I turned toward the dresser, my stomach tightened. The closet door was open again. Wider this time, 4 or 5 inches, just enough for the darkness to look deeper, thicker, somehow more present. I felt a sudden chill move up the center of my back, the kind that feels like someone lightly pressing a cold object against your spine. I walked over, slower now, feeling a strange hesitation I couldn't explain. The air around the door definitely felt colder, almost damp. I reached for the handle, only to notice something that made me pause. The bottoms of a few hanging clothes were still swaying gently, as if the door had just moved. As if something had brushed past them. I swallowed hard and pushed the door shut again. This time I held it closed for a few seconds, listening to the latch settle. I stared at the wood grain too long, trying to calm myself, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But as soon as I stepped back, the room felt wrong. I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the silence. It wasn't the same kind of silence I grew up with. It felt heavier, like the air from the closet was seeping into the room and changing it little by little. I tried to sleep, turning off the lights except for the small lamp on the nightstand. I lay there for a while, listening to the hum of the house and the wind moving faintly outside. The lamp cast a soft, warm glow and I kept my eyes half open, drifting in and out of that early stage of sleep. That's when I heard it. A soft shift, almost like fabric sliding against fabric. I froze, my breath catching quietly. The sound came from the closet. It wasn't loud, just delicate enough to make my skin tighten. Another soft movement followed, this time like a hanger turning slightly. I lifted my head slowly, afraid to look but more afraid not to. The closet door was open again. Just a few inches but unmistakably open, the light from the lamp barely touching the edge of the darkness inside. My heart thudded in a slow, uneasy rhythm as I sat up. The temperature in the room had dropped. I could feel it in the air brushing against my arms. I reached for the lamp switch but stopped halfway, realizing I didn't want more shadows, didn't want the room to shift again under brighter light. Instead, I stood carefully and walked toward the closet, each step deliberate, steady, quietly terrified. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The darkness inside felt different, too deep, too still, like it was absorbing the warm glow from the lamp instead of being illuminated by it. I lifted my hand to the edge of the door, and for a moment I swear I felt something cold brush the back of my fingers. I jerked slightly, breath hitching, but forced myself to pull the door open. The lamp behind me cast its faint light into the space, and everything looked normal at first. The clothes hanging neatly, old boxes resting on the shelf. A pair of shoes I hadn't worn in years pushed into the far corner. But then I noticed the back wall, or rather what should have been the back wall. Instead of the familiar faded wallpaper panel, there was a narrow, dark opening, an extension of space that hadn't existed when I lived here. A corridor maybe 2 feet wide, disappearing into pitch blackness. I felt something twist inside me, a quiet, instinctive fear that I didn't have a name for. I leaned forward slightly, squinting to see if my eyes were playing tricks, but the darkness didn't resolve into anything. It stayed stubbornly solid like a void. A faint sound drifted out, a soft, slow exhale, not the house settling, not my imagination, something breathing. My whole body stiffened, and for a moment the world seemed to hold still around me. The air coming from the opening felt wrong, colder, denser, carrying the faintest scent of earth, like damp soil that hadn't been disturbed in years. My throat tightened and I stepped backward without meaning to, my heel pressing into the carpet. I closed the door silently, slowly, carefully. I didn't slam it, I didn't make a sound, I just eased it shut until the latch clicked in the quietest, most fragile way. Then I backed away from it, never taking my eyes off the wood, feeling the coldness recede inch by inch. I turned the lamp off, climbed into bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just waited for the first hint of sunlight to reach the window. In the morning, everything looked ordinary again. The closet door was closed. The temperature felt normal. My parents chatted casually over breakfast, unaware that anything had been wrong. When they asked if I slept well, I lied. And when I went back to pack my bag, I avoided looking toward the closet at all. I didn't check to see if the passage was still there. I didn't want to know. I left by noon and haven't slept in that room since. My parents swear the house has no hidden spaces, no old crawlways, no construction oddities. They even opened the closet while I stood in the hallway too far to see inside. They said everything looked normal. I didn't step forward to check. Some doors aren't meant to be opened twice. I got home later than usual that night, around 3 in the morning when the world feels muted and almost suspended. I just finished an extra shift, the kind that leaves your body aching and your mind foggy but strangely alert. The air outside was cold enough that the metal railing on the stairwell stung my hand as I climbed, each step echoing softly through the dim hallway of my apartment building. It wasn't a fancy place, just an older three-story walk-up with flickering lights and thin walls, but at that hour it always felt peaceful. Most tenants were asleep, and the silence made the building feel gentler than it really was. I remember thinking how grateful I was to finally collapse into bed. Nothing about the night felt unusual. Not yet. When I reached my floor, the hallway light buzzed with that steady hum I'd grown used to. I walked toward my apartment, third door on the right, same scratched number plate, same tiny dent near the bottom where someone's moving box had hit it years ago. I slipped my key into the lock out of habit and felt it turn easily. Too easily. The door pushed inward with almost no resistance. For a moment, the exhaustion in my body took over, and I didn't register anything strange. I just stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a soft thud. The apartment was dark, but it was always dark when I came home late. I took a few steps in, waiting for the familiar scent of my vanilla candles or laundry detergent, something that felt like home. But the air smelled different, cleaner, sharper, like lemon cleaner instead of the warm mix of laundry and dust I secretly liked. I stopped walking. My eyes adjusted just enough to make out the shapes of the living room. The furniture looked right, a couch in the same place, a small table, the faint outline of picture frames on the wall. It all looked close enough that my tired brain tried to fill in the gaps and tell me everything was fine. But the longer I stood there, the more the details felt wrong. The couch was the wrong shape. My coffee table never had rounded corners. The pictures on the wall were spaced differently, lower, and I couldn't recognize their frames. That was the first moment a sliver of clarity cut through the exhaustion. I whispered into the darkness, not loudly, just enough to hear my own voice and ground myself. It didn't sound like it belonged in the room. Something about the air swallowed the sound too quickly. I turned slowly toward the entryway, expecting to see the familiar layout reflected faintly by the hallway light. But even the shadows felt off, longer, closer, as if the room wasn't shaped exactly like mine. The realization landed quietly but firmly. This wasn't my apartment. My stomach tightened as I reached back toward the door, keeping my movements slow. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't know why I felt that instinct so strongly, but it pulsed through me with each breath. As my hand found the doorknob, a faint creak sounded deeper inside the apartment, not loud, just a soft shifting sound like someone adjusting their weight on a wooden floor. My breath halted mid-inhale. I stayed perfectly still, the way you do when you're trying to convince yourself you misheard something. But the sound had been too precise to ignore, too intentional. I wasn't alone. My eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to where the bedrooms would be. It was just a darker shadow within shadows, but I could sense depth there, a place my eyes couldn't follow. The air felt colder at my back as if the room itself had exhaled silently. I almost turned the knob and slipped out without looking again, but something made me glance toward the mirror hanging near the living room, at least where a mirror hung in my own place. In this apartment, the mirror was bigger, rectangular instead of round. And the moment I looked into it, my heart paused in a way that almost hurt. There was someone standing in the hallway behind me. A figure still dark, upright, barely outlined by the faint light seeping through the window blinds. I didn't see details, not clearly, just the unmistakable shape of a person. They weren't walking toward me, weren't reaching out. They were just there, facing me, their posture too straight, too deliberate. My body felt suspended between wanting to scream and wanting to disappear. But the thing that truly froze me wasn't their presence, it was the angle. The mirror showed them a step behind my shoulder. But when I looked over that shoulder, the hallway was empty, completely empty. No movement, no shadow, no persons. As I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there. My hands trembled as I reached slowly for the doorknob, terrified that any sound might shift the figure's stillness. I didn't blink, I didn't breathe. I twisted the knob as quietly as I could, feeling the metal stick slightly before giving way. The creaking inside the apartment started again, soft steps this time slow, even like someone walking barefoot on cool floorboards. I felt the slightest breeze move across the back of my neck, as if someone had exhaled or moved closer. My body reacted before my mind did. I stepped backward out the door and pulled it shut gently, firmly, without slamming it. For a moment I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I swore someone would hear it. The buzzing of the overhead light suddenly felt oppressive, too bright against the tension still clinging to my skin. I turned toward my actual apartment door, just one door down, the real third door on the right. My real door had a tiny scratch on the upper hinge. My real door had a doormat I bought last year. My real door hadn't been left unlocked. I pushed my key in, and this time the resistance felt familiar. My eyes burned with tears I didn't realize I'd been holding back. When I stepped inside my real apartment, every detail felt painfully real. The candle scent, the clutter, the slightly crooked picture frame I kept meaning to fix. I locked the door behind me, turned on every light, and sat on the edge of the couch, shaking quietly until the adrenaline drained from my bloodstream. The next morning, in the clarity of daylight, I questioned everything. Maybe the exhaustion had twisted my perception. Maybe the mirror had reflected shadows in a strange way. Maybe the other apartment was just similar enough to confuse me. But when I walked past that door later on my way out, something stopped me cold. The door that I had accidentally opened the night before, the one I had slipped into without thinking, had no scratches on its hinges, no doormat, and no apartment number. Just a blank metal slab with a missing plate, as if it hadn't been assigned or occupied in a very long time. I never saw anyone coming or going from that door again. Not once. Some nights when I'm coming home late and the hallway is quiet and the lights hum the way they always do, I catch myself glancing toward that blank door. Sometimes it seems slightly ajar, just enough to show darkness behind it. I don't go near it anymore. And even now, weeks later, when I stand in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my teeth, I swear I keep seeing a figure behind me, just for a split second, standing exactly where I saw them in that other reflection at 3 a.m. When I first moved into the basement rental, it felt like a small relief after months of financial stress. The space wasn't perfect. Low ceilings, older carpet, a faint draft near the windows, but it was quiet, affordable, and close enough to work that I could walk on warm days. The landlord lived upstairs, a middle-aged man who spoke politely but seemed distracted, always halfway out the door when I talked to him. The basement had its own entrance at the side of the house, down a short flight of concrete steps that always collected leaves. Inside, the layout was simple: a living area, a small bedroom, a barely functional kitchen, and a laundry alcove tucked behind a thin folding door. On my first night, I unpacked slowly, letting the silence settle around me. It was the kind of heavy quiet that old houses have, the kind that makes every small sound feel amplified, even if it's just the hum of the fridge. There was a second door in the laundry alcove built into the wall behind the dryer. It was small and wooden, with peeling white paint and a rusted latch that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. When I asked the landlord about it during the tour, he shrugged quickly and said it was just storage, then changed the topic so abruptly it stuck in my mind. The way he avoided eye contact when he answered made it feel like more of a warning than an explanation. I didn't think about it much at first. Old houses always have weird corners, but every time I passed the laundry alcove, I caught myself glancing at that faded door. Something about it felt out of place, like it didn't belong to the rest of the structure. For the first week or two, everything felt normal enough. The hours after sunset were always a bit colder in the basement, but I chalked that up to concrete walls and poor insulation. Some nights I heard faint footsteps from the landlord moving around upstairs, and the old pipes made soft, rhythmic tapping sounds that I got used to quickly. But one evening, during a short power flicker, something changed. I was folding clothes near the laundry alcove when the lights dimmed and buzzed, not long enough to fully cut out, but long enough to make the air feel like it shifted. When the light steadied again, the rusted latch on the storage door had dropped open. The metal hook swung gently, clicking against the wood as if someone had just unlatched it from the other side. I stood completely still, listening for movement. The only sound was my own breath, shallow and uneven. I told myself the vibration from the flicker must have loosened the latch. It was old, after all. But when I moved closer, the crack beneath the door seemed darker than before, almost like the space behind it absorbed the dim basement light. The air near the door felt colder too, just slightly enough that the hairs on my arms lifted. After a long moment of hesitation, I lifted the latch and closed it again, pressing it down firmly. The door made a soft, groaning sound as it settled. I finished the laundry quickly that night and avoided looking toward the alcove as I walked back to the living area. For a few days, nothing strange happened, and I started to feel silly for letting the small incident get under my skin. But the unease crept back in subtle ways. I began waking up to the feeling that something in the basement had changed while I slept. A drawer left slightly open when I knew I'd closed it. A faint scent in the air, like old wood or earth, that didn't match anything in the basement. Once I found my shoes neatly placed beside the bed, even though I always left them by the door. Each time I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things or simply forgetting. But deep down, I felt watched, not directly, not constantly, but in quiet moments before sleep or when I first entered the room after work. The turning point happened late one night when the power flickered again. This time the outage lasted long enough for the lights to cut fully. The sudden darkness was thick, almost physical. I stood still in the living area, waiting for the hum of electricity to return. When the lights flicked back on, I heard it, the soft creak of a door hinge from the laundry alcove. A slow, deliberate sound. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body told me not to. But the quiet stretched on, and eventually I forced myself to walk toward the alcove. The storage door was open, not wide, just a few inches, enough to show the sliver of a room behind it, a room that was lit by a single, old-fashioned bulb hanging from a wire. The light inside didn't flicker with the power outage. It glowed steadily, too warm, too isolated from the rest of the basement. My heart hammered in a slow, thick rhythm as I stepped closer. The room behind the door was narrow and long, filled with shelves that held boxes, bags, and objects I couldn't identify at first glance. And on the shelf nearest to me were things I recognized immediately. A scarf I lost 3 years ago at a bus stop. A keychain I misplaced in college. A book I hadn't seen since moving out of my parents' house. They looked untouched, perfectly preserved, as if someone had been collecting pieces of my life and storing them here. My breathing turned shallow as I reached toward the nearest item, unable to believe what I was seeing. The room felt too still, too intentional, and I hesitated in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. Then behind the shelves, behind the row of old belongings, I heard a door whisper open. A soft, slow shift of hinges, not the door I'd opened, another door further inside the hidden room. The kind of sound that makes your body go cold before your mind catches up. I didn't wait to see what was behind it. I backed away quickly, heart racing, stumbling into the laundry alcove as I reached for the storage door. I slammed it shut, not gently, not quietly, and shoved the latch down with shaking fingers. As I ran back into the living area, turned on every light, and didn't sleep a single minute that night. In the morning, everything was exactly as it had been before. The basement looked ordinary. The air smelled normal again. The storage door remained closed. Nothing appeared out of place. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't unhear the sound of that second door opening in a room no tenant was ever supposed to enter. So I moved out that same afternoon, packed everything quickly, barely waiting for the landlord to come home. When I told him there was a problem with the basement and I needed to leave, he didn't ask questions. He only nodded, almost relieved, and handed me back my deposit without counting a single bill. That alone told me more than words could. As I haven't gone back since. And yet, in my new apartment, far from that basement, far from that house, I still find small objects appearing in odd places. A hair tie I lost years ago, a lighter I threw away, a childhood photo I thought I misplaced forever. They appear quietly, gently, as if placed with care. And every time I find one, I think about that second door in the hidden room behind the storage closet, and whatever was standing behind it, waiting for me to step further inside. During my first year as a medical intern, I learned that hospitals feel different at night. The same hallways that buzz and hum during the day become strangely hollow after midnight, their shadows stretching longer, the fluorescent lights flickering in ways that make you question whether you're tired or imagining things. I worked the night shift often because no one else wanted it, and I told myself I didn't mind the quiet. The hospital was an older building, layers of renovations stacked on top of older wings that never fully matched, but after a few months I'd gotten used to the odd layout. On some nights when fatigue weighed heavy enough on my shoulders, I took shortcuts through unused corridors just to save a minute or two. It wasn't exactly encouraged, but everyone did it. The hospital at night felt like a maze that belonged to us alone. One night near the end of my shift, I was walking through one of those older wings, the part of the hospital slated for renovation but stuck in endless administrative delays. The floors were clean but scuffed, the air colder than in the main units, and the overhead lights hummed irregularly, like they were struggling to stay awake. I'd taken this route dozens of times, enough to know every dented wall panel and every flickering bulb. But that night, something pulled at the corner of my attention, a soft glow spilling out from underneath a metal service door that was usually locked. The door stood slightly ajar, just a fraction, letting out a thin strip of light and a low, steady humming sound that reminded me of old electrical equipment. At first, I thought maintenance was working late, but the corridor was empty and the hospital's overnight maintenance staff always left their cart nearby when they were around. I slowed as I approached the door, the cold in the hallway settling deeper into my arms. The latch was unfastened, hanging loosely as if someone had just slipped through. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I was exhausted, hungry, and ready to go home. But hospitals teach you to notice things that shouldn't be overlooked. A wrong door, an unexpected sound, a light where there shouldn't be one. So I reached out, nudging the metal panel gently with my fingertips. The door opened silently, too smoothly for its age. Inside was a long, narrow hallway I had never seen before. It wasn't on any map I'd studied during orientation, and I'd never noticed anyone entering or exiting. The floor was immaculate compared to the main wing, the tiles reflecting the muted glow of overhead lights that were brighter than the flickering ones behind me. The row of patient rooms lined one side of the hall, each door slightly open, each interior lit by soft, flickering lights, almost like candles, though I knew that was impossible in a hospital. The humming sound felt stronger here, vibrating faintly through the soles of my shoes, almost like a heartbeat. I stepped inside without entirely meaning to, drawn by a quiet curiosity I couldn't explain. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, but also something older, like paper files stored for decades or linens that hadn't been moved in years. I walked slowly, glancing into the first room as I passed. It looked like any other patient room, a bed, a chair, a curtain partially drawn. But there were no monitors, no IV stands, no signs of modern equipment. It was empty, too empty, like a set piece missing its actors. I moved on, feeling a slight pressure building in my chest, the way anxiety sometimes settles before you understand what's wrong. As I reached the third or fourth room, I noticed something strange. On a counter inside, next to an old lamp, lay a stack of patient charts. They were neatly arranged, each one with a typed label. Something about the top chart caught my eye, my name printed clearly across the tab, not a similar name, not a coincidence. My exact name spelled correctly, followed by a date, tomorrow's date. My hands went cold, a sharp chill moving through my fingertips. I stepped closer, pulling the chart toward me with hesitant fingers. The pages were filled with notes I didn't recognize, written in a sterile, clinical tone. Observations, measurements, but no attending physician listed, no signature, no reason for my name to be there at all. My breath grew shallow, and a soft buzzing filled my ears, not from the lights but from my own pulse pounding too loudly. I placed the chart down and backed out of the room. As I stepped into the hallway, the flickering lights above seemed to dim slightly, as if reacting to my presence. I felt watched, not by a person but by the hallway itself, by the air, by the sense that I had stepped somewhere no one was supposed to enter. I turned around, intending to walk straight back to the service door and leave, but the hallway behind me suddenly felt longer than before. The door seemed farther away, its metal frame caught in a faint, shifting shadow. Before I took another step, I heard something from one of the rooms behind me. Not a footstep, not a voice. A soft, slow exhale like someone waking up. My body froze. I felt the hair stand on the back of my neck. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the faint creak of a bed or the soft shift of weight. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, rooted where I stood. I forced myself to move step by slow step toward the service door. The humming grew louder behind me, pulsing like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When I finally reached the entrance, I pushed the door open and nearly stumbled into the main hallway. The harsh fluorescent lights felt blinding after the dim glow inside. The cold air rushed out behind me and dissipated like a draft. I turned around to look back, expecting to see the same lit hallway, the row of doors, the flickering bulbs, but the space behind the service door was pitch black, completely dark. The lights from the main hallway didn't spill inside at all. The air felt warm again, normal, and the humming was gone. My hands shook uncontrollably as I closed the door gently, almost reverently, as if afraid of disturbing whatever lived behind it. The next morning, I returned to the same hallway, determined to convince myself I had been half asleep or overstressed. But when I reached the service door, it was sealed shut. Not locked, sealed. Fresh paint covered the edges and a metal plate had been bolted across it, brand new, reflecting the overhead lights. No one had mentioned renovations. No one had talked about sealing off any part of the building overnight. When I asked a senior nurse about the old wing, she frowned and said no one had used that service corridor in decades, that the hospital shut it down long before she started working there, and that no patient rooms existed back there anymore. I never told anyone what I saw. I didn't want to be the intern who cracked under pressure. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm walking through the quiet parts of the hospital, I swear I hear that faint humming again, soft, pulsing, almost like it's calling me back. And every time I pass a closed door, I wonder if my chart is still waiting somewhere behind it, dated for a day that hasn't come yet. I agreed to house sit for my aunt mostly because I needed a quiet place to work and she needed someone to feed her cat. Her home was old, tucked away in a quieter part of town, the kind of place where the streetlights make long shadows across the sidewalk and the nights feel deeper than they should. I'd stayed there plenty of times as a kid, though I never paid much attention to the small details back then. The creaking floorboards, the draft near the back door, the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. As an adult, the house felt different. Larger somehow, a little too still. But it was peaceful enough, and the first night passed without anything unusual, just the soft hum of appliances and the occasional meow from her cat wandering the halls. The pantry was one of the oldest parts of the home, a narrow room built off the kitchen with a heavy wooden door and a lock that looked much older than the rest of the house. My aunt always kept it locked, and I'd never questioned it. She once mentioned it was just for storage, but the tone she used had a quiet finality, like she didn't want to elaborate. On my second night there, while making tea, I noticed the pantry door shift slightly, as if the lock hadn't caught properly and the door had bounced back a fraction of an inch. I remember pausing, hand halfway to the kettle, feeling a strange little tug of attention toward that sliver of darkness. It wasn't open, not really. Just enough to show a thin, dark seam where the hinges had relaxed. I brushed it off, turning away, telling myself houses move and settle all the time. But a few minutes later, as I sat on the couch in the next room, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the kitchen. It was soft at first, irregular, like something gently knocking against wood from the inside. I tried to ignore it. I even turned up the TV slightly, telling myself it was the old pipes or a tree brushing against the siding. But the tapping continued, slow, steady, almost rhythmic. The kind of tapping that sounds deliberate. It's the kind that sounds like someone lightly testing a door to see if it would open. Each tiny sound made the back of my neck tighten a little more. I finally stood, moving toward the kitchen with slow steps, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The tapping stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. I stood in the doorway, staring at the pantry. The door was barely cracked, just a fraction wider than before. I felt a cool draft brush across my ankles, even though the rest of the kitchen was warm from the kettle still steaming. I told myself there must be an air vent inside, something causing the door to shift. Still, I walked forward and pressed the door shut. The old lock clicked firmly into place, and I held it there for a moment, feeling the weight of the wood beneath my hand. The quiet returned. Later that night, while lying in bed with the lights off and the house wrapped in darkness, I heard it again. A soft tapping, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more, the exact same rhythm as before. I sat up, heart thudding gently in my chest, listening to the sound drift faintly through the quiet house. It didn't echo, it didn't travel, it sounded like it was happening just a room away. I forced myself to stay in bed, telling myself it was just the house settling, the wind shifting, anything logical. Oh, but I didn't sleep for hours. The next morning, the house looked normal again. Sunlight poured through the windows, washing away the heaviness of the night. I made breakfast, fed the cat, and tried to shake the lingering unease. But when I opened the refrigerator, something strange caught my eye. A jar of cinnamon sticks on the shelf, exactly like the kind my aunt used to keep in the pantry when I was little. But the pantry had been locked for years. I stood there with the refrigerator door open, letting cold air spill out around me, trying to piece together how the jar could have moved. Eventually, I put it aside, convincing myself my aunt must have moved it earlier, or maybe I simply hadn't noticed it the day before. That evening, the tapping began earlier, before sunset even fully settled. I was washing dishes when I heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the pantry. 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. My hands froze in the warm, soapy water. Without turning around, I listened as the tapping grew slightly louder, more insistent, like something testing the strength of the door. I dried my hands slowly, my breathing turning shallow as I turned toward the pantry. The door was cracked open again, wider than before, wide enough that I could see shadows inside shifting slightly with the movement of the house. I stepped closer, each footstep feeling too loud in the quiet kitchen. The air near the pantry door felt cool again, almost damp. I reached out, hesitating just before touching the edge. The moment my fingers brushed the wood, the tapping stopped completely. A silence settled so suddenly it felt like the house was holding its breath. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open slowly, letting the dim kitchen light spill inside. The pantry was empty. Completely empty. No shelves, no jars, no old bags of flour the way I remembered from childhood. Just a bare floor and bare walls stripped clean as though no one had used it in decades. But at the back of the pantry against the far wall was another door. A smaller one, wooden, blending almost perfectly into the paneling. I didn't remember it from when I was little. I didn't remember it from the tour my aunt gave me years earlier. But it was there now, closed, old, silent. The air in the pantry felt different, thicker, as if the room had its own pressure system. My heart pounded as I stared at the smaller door, feeling a pull toward it I couldn't explain. I approached slowly, footsteps echoing faintly off the empty walls. The closer I got, the colder the air became until I could see my breath faintly in front of me. I reached out, brushing my fingers against the rough wood. The moment I touched it, I felt a soft vibration through the panel. Not movement, not knocking, breathing. A slow, steady, too deep to belong to anything small. I stepped back instantly, panic rising like a wave in my chest. The breathing grew louder, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there, as if something on the other side had shifted its head toward the sound of my retreat. I turned and left the pantry quickly, closing the door behind me, this time pushing the lock with more force than necessary. The tapping didn't return that night, but I didn't sleep either. The next morning, I called my aunt and told her something was wrong with the pantry door. She became unusually quiet, her voice dropping to a lower tone as she told me not to open it again. She didn't explain why. She just said she would handle it when she returned. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers. I left her house that afternoon, packing my things with trembling hands, unable to shake the feeling that something behind that second door had been listening to me the whole time. When my aunt returned the following week, She sent me a short message thanking me for watching the house. She didn't mention the pantry and I didn't ask. But sometimes, when I visit her now, I hear faint tapping from the kitchen late at night. 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. And no matter where I stand in the house, it always sounds like it's coming from directly behind whatever door is closest to me. I stopped at the motel because I was too tired to keep driving. It was one of those long, quiet highways where the night feels heavier the later it gets, and the headlights from passing cars get fewer and fewer until you start feeling like the only person awake for miles. The motel looked ordinary enough, an old L-shaped building with dim yellow lights and a vending machine humming in the corner of the lot. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. It was just a place to rest my eyes for a few hours. I checked in quickly, got a room on the second floor, and carried my bag up the narrow metal staircase that rattled under every step. The hallway was silent except for the buzzing of the overhead lights, and the carpet had that slightly damp feel that old motels always seem to have. My room was at the very end, with only one neighbor beside me. At first, the closeness of having someone in the room next door felt weirdly comforting. Most of the places I'd stayed in during long drives were too empty, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your mind start crafting noises out of nothing. Here, I could at least hear life on the other side of the wall, soft footsteps now and then, the faint creak of a bed frame. Nothing unusual. I unpacked a few things, washed my face, and stretched out on the mattress. The sheets were stiff, but the exhaustion made everything feel softer than it probably was. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just lay in the quiet, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner. I must have drifted into a light sleep because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of someone crying. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just soft, uneven sobs coming from the room beside mine. For a moment, I thought it was coming from a dream, that muffled sound you sometimes hear right before waking. But as my senses sharpened, I realized it was real. The crying was faint, like someone was trying not to be heard. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling a tightness build slowly in my chest. Something about the cry didn't sound normal. There was a strange rhythm to it, almost too consistent, as if the person were repeating the same cycle of breath and whimpers over and over again. I shifted quietly, trying not to make noise. The bed springs creaked under me and the crying stopped instantly. Not faded, not trailed off, stopped like someone had pressed a mute button. The sudden absence made my skin prickle. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to return, but the room beside mine stayed completely silent. The kind of silence that feels intentional, like someone is listening back. After a few minutes, I exhaled slowly and rolled onto my side. Maybe the person had just composed themselves or fallen asleep. I told myself not to overthink it. But then the doorknob on the adjoining door, the small door between our rooms that motels use to connect suites, rattled lightly. Not a twist, not a forceful shake, just a soft testing, like someone gently checking if it was locked. I froze. The metal knob wiggled again, barely moving, as if whoever was on the other side didn't want to alert me. My heartbeat pulsed in my throat as I stared at the thin door separating the rooms. The rattling continued for a few seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed felt too close, too aware. I pulled the blanket up to my chest without thinking, my breathing shallow. Eventually, exhaustion made my eyes heavy again. I drifted in and out, each small noise pulling me back to the edge of sleep. At some point, the crying started again, this time softer, almost like humming. I told myself not to listen, not to let the unease sink deeper, but it was impossible to ignore. The sound seeped through the wall like a low vibration, growing slightly louder each time I shifted positions, as if responding to my movements. It didn't sound like grief anymore. It sounded practiced. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up slowly, walked across the room, and placed my hand lightly on my side of the adjoining door. The wood felt cold, unnaturally cold. I leaned in, pressing my ear gently against the surface. The crying stopped mid-breath, the silence hitting so suddenly that my heart lurched. Then, without warning, something tapped on the door from the other side. A single, gentle tap. Not knockings, not poundings. Just one quiet tap aimed exactly where my ear was. I jerked back, stumbling a little, my entire body tense. I didn't approach the door again. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I backed away slowly until the edge of the bed touched the back of my legs. I climbed onto it carefully, pulling the blanket around myself, watching the door as if it might open at any moment, but nothing else happened. No crying, no tapping, no movement. It was as though whoever or whatever was there had simply lost interest. Morning light filtered into the room before I finally dared to move again. The hallway outside looked normal, empty, and harmless. I dressed quickly and stepped out, glancing at the door beside mine. Curiosity tugged at me despite everything. I walked to the neighboring door, leaning forward just enough to listen. No sound. After a moment of hesitation, I knocked lightly. Oh, nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. I bent slightly and looked at the small gap beneath the door. No light, no movement. Something inside me urged me to check with the motel manager, if only to confirm someone had rented the room. So before leaving, I stopped at the front desk, trying to sound casual as I asked whether the room next to mine was still occupied. The manager looked at me with a confused expression. "Room 212, he asked. I nodded. That room's been empty for weeks, he said. We're doing renovations. Haven't had anyone in there lately." For a moment, I just stared at him, waiting for him to smile or correct himself. But he didn't. I went back upstairs, heart pounding, and opened the door to the empty room beside mine. The manager had given me the key after I insisted something seemed off. When I stepped inside, the air felt colder than the hallway. The room was stripped bare. No furniture, no bed, no carpet. The wallpaper had been peeled away in some places, exposing stained concrete underneath. It looked like no one had slept there in years. The adjoining door on their side was blocked by a stack of old paint cans. There was no way anyone could have reached it. No way anyone could have tapped on it. No place for anyone to stand and cry in the way I heard all night. So I didn't say anything to the manager when I returned the key. I didn't tell him what I heard or how close it sounded. I packed my bag, checked out, and left the motel without looking back. But sometimes, late at night, when I stay in unfamiliar places or hear the faintest noise through a wall, I feel a quiet unease settle in my stomach. And every so often, if a room beside mine is empty and the night is a little too still, I swear I hear that soft crying drift through the wall again, almost as if the sound has been following me, waiting for another thin door to press against. I spent a weekend at a friend's house last spring, partly to catch up and partly to get away from the noise of my apartment building for a while. He lived farther out from the city, in one of those quiet neighborhoods where every yard blends into the next and the nights feel heavier, calmer. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac with a big backyard that looked peaceful during the day, green lawn, a few tall trees, and a small wooden shed in the corner wrapped in vines. I didn't pay much attention to it at first beyond thinking it looked old and a little crooked, leaning back slightly like it was tired of standing upright. My friend mentioned he kept tools inside, but the way he said it was quick, almost dismissive. I didn't think anything of it. The guest room I stayed in faced the backyard, and on the first night I opened the window a little to let in the cool air. The house was quiet after midnight, so quiet that the faint rustle of leaves and the distant sound of a lone car on the main road stood out more than usual. I lay there for a long time just listening to the stillness. At some point, I noticed the shed door was slightly open, swaying inward and outward with the gentlest motion. There wasn't any wind that night. The trees weren't moving, and the small wind chime on the porch didn't make a single sound. But the shed door rocked back and forth like it was breathing. I watched it for a minute or two before closing the curtains and telling myself it was just the old hinges shifting. The next morning over breakfast, I mentioned the shed door being open. My friend paused for a moment, spoon in hand, then nodded slowly like he'd forgotten to lock it. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it does that sometimes." But his tone felt off, almost like the topic made him uncomfortable. He quickly shifted the conversation to weekend plans and I let it go. During the day, the shed looked harmless enough in the sunlight. The door was shut firmly, the vines clinging to its sides unmoving. It didn't look like anything more than an old storage space. But that night when I returned to the guest room, something about the air felt different, heavier, as if the house itself was settling into a deeper quiet. I turned off the lights and lay down, the thin curtains glowing softly from the street lamp outside. After a while, I glanced toward the window and my chest tightened. The shed door was open again, wider this time, just a few inches, but enough to see darkness inside. I sat up slowly, watching. The air outside looked completely still, but the door gently moved in a slow rocking pattern, like someone inside was pushing it lightly and letting it fall back. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just the wood expanding or contracting with the temperature drop. But then I saw a faint flicker of light from inside the shed, a soft, warm glow like the weak flame of a candle. It pulsed once, then again, as if someone had moved something in front of it. My heart thudded softly. I leaned closer to the window, straining to see better, but the angle made it difficult to see past the vines. The light flickered again, and then I heard it. A slow, dragging sound, like something scraping along the shed's floorboards. I froze. The sound wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic. It was slow, steady, and deliberate. Something was moving inside the shed. I wanted to wake my friend, but I hesitated. What if it was just an animal? What if I woke him for nothing? I waited, listening as the dragging sound stopped. The shed door stilled. The faint light blinked off. Then the backyard fell into a silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. I closed the curtains tightly and tried to lie back down, but it took a long time for my body to relax and even longer for sleep to find me. The next morning, the shed door was closed again. I didn't mention it this time. My friend seemed in a good mood and I didn't want to bring tension into the day, but I kept thinking about that light, that dragging sound. Later in the afternoon, when he went to the store, I stood at the back door staring at the shed. In the daylight, it seemed smaller somehow, less threatening. I walked toward it slowly, feeling the grass cool under my feet. The shed door was shut, but not fully. It rested loosely against the frame, the old latch hanging open. As I reached out and touched it lightly, the wood felt cold, colder than the surrounding air. I stepped back, I didn't open it. That night, everything escalated. I woke suddenly around 2 or 3 in the morning, my heart thudding for no reason I could understand. The room was dark, with just a sliver of street lamp glow cutting across the floor. I glanced toward the window and felt my stomach drop. The shed door was wide open, not swaying, not moving, just open, a dark, rectangular void cutting into the night. My breath caught in my throat. The air felt colder than before, creeping into the room in a way that shouldn't have been possible with the window barely cracked. Then the light appeared again. A faint glow deep inside the shed, almost like someone striking a match. It flickered, grew brighter, and then dimmed. I leaned closer despite every instinct telling me not to, and that's when I saw movement. A shadow, slow, slight, as if someone was turning, shifting their weight inside the darkness. I couldn't see details, just the unmistakable outline of a figure, tall, still, facing the doorway. My mouth went dry. I stood from the bed before I fully realized what I was doing, my body moving slowly, quietly, as if afraid to draw attention from the outside. Something about the figure felt wrong, not like a person casually standing, but like something waiting, watching. As I left the room and walked down the hallway to my friend's door, my hand hovered over the doorknob before I knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. The house was too quiet. My pulse raced as dread curled slowly into my mind. I pushed his door open gently. He was asleep, completely undisturbed, breathing steadily. Relief washed over me, but only for a second, because in the dim light drifting through his blinds I saw something else. His shadow on the opposite wall wasn't shaped like him. It was taller, thinner, its head tilted at an angle that didn't match his sleeping posture. I blinked, and the shape condensed back into something normal, as if I'd imagined it. But the cold spreading through my limbs told me I hadn't. I backed out quietly, closed his door, and returned to the guest room. The shed door outside was still wide open. And now there was no movement, no light, just a silent, gaping dark. The next morning, I confronted my friend, not with what I saw, but with something gentler. I asked about the shed again. This time he didn't brush it off. He looked at the floor for a long moment before saying he didn't use it anymore, that he hadn't stepped inside for months, that he always kept the door closed, even locked, yet somehow it was always open in the morning. Well, he avoided my eyes when he said it. Before I left that afternoon, I glanced at the shed one last time. The door was closed, but the vines around it looked disturbed, as if recently brushed aside. As I walked toward my car, I felt something watching me, not from the window, not from my friend's house, but from the shed itself. Something patient, something waiting. I haven't gone back since. And every so often, when I visit a house with a backyard or pass by an old shed in someone else's property, I feel that same cold air brush the back of my neck, like a reminder. Like it followed me home. Night has a way of turning the simplest things into thresholds we don't always mean to cross. A door left slightly open, a hallway we've walked 1,000 times, a quiet room that should feel safe, all of them can shift without warning, showing us places we weren't meant to see. These stories remind us that fear doesn't always arrive with noise or violence. Sometimes it slips in gently, through a crack in the frame or a latch that doesn't hold, asking us to notice the small changes we try so hard to ignore. If any part of tonight felt too familiar, know that you're not alone in that feeling. We've all opened doors we shouldn't have, some literal, some not, and found something waiting on the other side that lingered far longer than it should have. There's a strange comfort in sharing these moments in the quiet hours, letting the darkness settle around us while we listen together. You might even find that the stories echo in your mind later, not loudly, but softly, the way a memory returns when the house grows still. If you want more nights like this, you can stay close to the channel. Come back when the rest of the world is asleep, when the soft kind of fear feels easier to sit with. Subscribing or sharing helps these whispered stories find the people who need company in the silence, but there's no rush. The night always waits, and so do we. But for now, let the lights dim and your breathing settle. Close the doors gently, but don't think too hard about what might stand quietly on the other side. Rest if you can. And if you can't, then just listen to the stillness as it carries you through the dark. Good night.